there's a culture of rugged individualism that's really pervasive in low income communities. I'm the boss and everybody else works for me. I get the big checks, everybody gets checked.
That was a bar right there.
I've been doing my best to like highlight, you know, the part. I look at things like the parts of a bike. Like the whole bike is working cooperatively, right? Um, where would the front wheel be without the back wheel? You could probably still ride the bike, but it's not going to be very. It's going to be very uncomfortable, right? How about the right pedal without the left pedal? How about the bike without the body? How about the body without the bike? As a way of like, we all need to work together. You might have a little and you might have a little, but together we got a lot.
If the power's with the people, then the people must be bold. Fight to liberate the soul while we liberate our souls. Liberate the resource, change the story that's been told. We slam black warriors filled with black.
Welcome to Stories from Home, Moving the Just Transition. And I'm your host, Keenan Rhodes. Last season, we called this podcast Stories from Home, Living the Just Transition, as we took you to parts of the country where leaders embody just transition in their work and daily lives. This season, it's Moving the Just Transition, movement through time. We've talked about the origins of environmental justice and climate justice.
I think that environmental racism really begins in the slave quarters. I think it begins with the extraction of our land and our labor.
Movement across ideas and solutions through the ways that communities are solving climate change without leaving anyone behind.
It's a cultural revolution that we need, quite honestly. And anything that's not focused on cultural evolution, in my head and in my heart, is a false solution.
And movement through hearts and minds and the importance of art and storytelling to change the world.
I think is a huge part of storytelling is how we change the sense of value and worth, especially in a capitalist society.
And to thread the needle, in our last episode of the season, we get to where the movement begins. Within ourselves and our relationship to ourselves, to others, and to the world.
Our survival as a species is to connect with each other in a way that the dominant power structure doesn't want us to. And from that foundation, you can build so much.
You'll hear from Aghilah Nadaraj and Asli in Mwaafrika at the Kheprw Institute in Indianapolis, Indiana. Kheprw builds community wealth by investing in the knowledge, culture, livelihood, resources, and environment of the neighborhood and beyond. P.S. It's also the community I was raised in. And you'll hear from Nadaraj Smith, founder of Rich City Rides, a bicycle cooperative in Richmond, California. This co-op is an example of what a just transition looks like. Nadaraj is also the founder of Cooperation Richmond, which helps develop and scale work on cooperatives in Richmond, California. He's a masterful storyteller and navigates how his own experiences of community and connection led to Rich City Rides and other projects.
I've just been more of the conduit or the vessel to bring these things together, so I'm honored by that.
Lastly, you'll hear from Marion G., co-executive director of climate justice on the intersection of grief and our personal calling to leadership. First, we touch base in Indy with Kheprw.
My name is Aghilah Nadaraj, and I've been with Kheprw for about 5 years now. One of my primary roles in the space is as the grants manager and on the fund development team, as well as environmental justice work. I also represent Kheprw Institute as a youth leader on the Climate Justice Alliance Board of Directors.
Aghilah's grandfathers are from South India and of the Tamil people. They moved to Malaysia as rubber plantation workers, while India and Malaysia were both under British occupation. Both Aghilah and her parents were born in Malaysia. They moved to Japan for a few years when she was still a baby, then migrated to the U.S., eventually settling down in Indiana. Kheprw and its focus on community immediately resonated with Aghilah.
And, came to the U.S. a little bit before 9/11 and very much shaped by that experience as well. So was very tied and drawn to doing community work, and then as my political consciousness raised, very clear about, the path, or at least my path around liberation was community building and community grassroots work.
Asli in Mwaafrika, youth leader, has been a part of Kheprw as long as she can remember.
My name is Asli. I've been around Kheprw for pretty much my whole life. My father um, was, I guess, a part of the generation before mine that was into the Kheprw work. And so I first started just tagging along with him, running errands with dad and being around the space like that. And then my older brother and I, who also works very closely with Kheprw, were tagging along with him. And eventually it just became a place that we went to every single Sunday. They used to have roundtable discussions where people in Kheprw would talk about different topics every Sunday. And that just became, part of the ritual.
The Kheprw Institute is all about starting with self and about community. It started as a summer program and an effort for two Black parents to support the children in their neighborhood. It's been 20 years since then. Now, it's an intergenerational community organization that fosters leadership, entrepreneurship, and critical thinking skills. The young people and the elders take these tools to empower each other and other members of their communities and neighborhoods.
To me, that just means bettering yourself and making sure that you're able to master tools and skills by yourself for yourself. And in reflection of that, you're able to be a better asset to the community. You're able to share more knowledge. You're able to help develop and help empower and help other people gain that mastery once you have it within yourself.
And particularly as folks who come from marginalized communities, there's a very invested narrative and project of making you feel powerless and making you feel like you don't have any agency and you can't do anything. And I feel a lot of the work that Kheprw does is challenging that very directly. It's around interdependence and self-determination.
While at Kheprw and part of the Climate Justice Alliance's Story Snapshots project, I trained young people in skills of video production, and together we produced a short film, The Kheprw Story. It's about community wealth building and Kheprw's origins that you can find in the show notes. As a young person at Kheprw, I grew up in this space working in gardens, hosting critical conversations and book studies about white supremacy, police violence, environmental justice, and many other topics that impact our daily lives. You don't enter the Kheprw space and not emerge with some critical tools to foster leadership and self-mastery. The cliche believe in yourself is pretty common, but when some folks have been systematically disempowered and discouraged from imagining better futures, believing in self-determination and our ability to shape our fates is very powerful. Kheprw sees this mastery of self, this growth, as foundational to community wealth.
Community wealth building is a framework and idea that we came across maybe a couple years ago. We were reading this book, and not to expose us as a bunch of nerds, but we are a bunch of nerds. We were reading, trying to look this up, this book around community wealth building from, I think, the Democracy Collaborative. And as we were reading it, we realized we're like, that's the work that we do. And it's a framework that looks at how are we looking at the resources, the potential and the assets that exist in community in a collective approach that enables us to care for each other and the planet. And when people think of wealth, people often think of just finance, right? Money, how much money I have in the bank, how much are my assets, stock, options. But we're looking at wealth so much more broadly, at not just the relationships we have, what is the intellectual capital we have? What are the histories of knowledge and skills that people in our community have? The cultural piece. There's a lot of arts and culture that exist in our communities that are very critical to our survival and our thriving in a way. And so community wealth building is a philosophy and an approach that Kheprw uses to communicate the expanses of what we do. And that is a people-centered approach to empowerment and community.
So at the core of community wealth building, we have the self and self-growth and self-mastery so that we are ready and able to build and shape our community.
During the moments of crisis, people step in, right? People step in, step up to provide what is needed because, that's what a lot of us have already been doing. The relationships we have with each other help provide the critical, I would say, like infrastructure and ability to respond and organize. So you see in moments of crisis like the COVID pandemic or natural disasters, how networks or communities just like come together to provide what is needed. So I'm gonna give an example really quick of why relationships, like how relationships have led to tangible impact in a community is, at Kheprw we have every Sunday, and this has been for maybe about 2, 3 years, maybe even before, we had a member of our team initially, John, who had a relationship with Dove House Recovery, which is a women's recovery shelter, right? Maybe like half a mile up, maybe from where we're at. And they get a lot of Trader Joe's food recovery. And they're like, we don't need all of this. Would y'all be interested in picking some up? And so from that, that relationship has led to about, now we get like sometimes 40 to 60 boxes of produce, of food, of like rice, like just like grocery stuff from Trader Joe's and like some other places. And now we are able to distribute that food on a wider scale.
Stories like these are common in communities that build their capacity for mutual aid, a term that describes the collective actions it takes to support community well-being and reaffirm that all lives have inherent value. Mutual aid often takes place when a community grows an ecosystem of ways to take care of itself when systems and institutions around them fail or even cause them harm. You often see mutual aid networks spring up in climate and environmental crises, like when natural disasters or corporate environmental disasters take place, or during the COVID-19 pandemic and the inadequate protections for people most vulnerable to the illness. It's also been a long history of practice in communities of color. Free Black populations post-Civil War often had to rely on each other for support. The Black Panthers also had many survival programs intended to develop and fill in the social services that should have been provided by the state to underserved Black communities, like free health clinics, providing free breakfast to school kids, employment and workforce development, and legal aid, just to name a few. Many immigrant communities have informal economies and associations of care and support to help new folks find housing, jobs, and access government resources. A common principle of mutual aid is solidarity, not charity. We're all capable and enough just the way we are, and we can support one another to have thriving communities.
If you put an intention out into the universe and, you're investing and you're putting work in it, like the universe conspires with you. And to really invest in the relationships you have with people around you, to get to know folks, who are they, what are their hopes, what are their dreams, what are their challenges, like, because that act in and of itself is an act of liberation.
It's on that foundation of intention, investment, relationships, dreams, and visions of active liberation that Najari Smith co-founded Rich City Rides.
My name is Najari Smith, originally from Brooklyn, New York. Been in the Bay Area for over a decade now, and I'm the executive director of Rich City Rides, as well as the co-founder and co-owner, one of the worker owners of the Rich City Rides Bicycle Cooperative. Let me see, I just came just prior to starting this interview. I rode through a park that we helped build called Unity Park here in Richmond, California. It's about 2 blocks away from the shop, about maybe 3 blocks away from where I live. I live in Richmond, I work in Richmond, I build in Richmond, I organize in Richmond.
Rich City Rides begins in his childhood in Brooklyn.
A lot of how I grew up in Brooklyn also speaks to the work that I do now. I'm a child of one of 3. It was me and my little brother that grew up with my mom. Single mother. We didn't grow up with a whole lot. came up on welfare. My older brother, he lived with our grandparents. And I remember, as I was growing up, just my thing was, I just don't want to be poor, right? That was a lot of the things that in those early years of coming up, growing up, led me to what I do now. Like I still remember my first memories of being in a bike was in the child seat, the orange child seat, my mom's white Peugeot road bike in Brooklyn, and she would take us on rides through Prospect Park. And now, as an adult, one of our most popular activities are these bike rides that we do with youth and families, originating from Unity Park on the Richmond Greenway to we've been to every park in Richmond. We've done some longer excursions to parks in neighboring cities.
Now, Rich City Rides is the only bike shop in Richmond, California, and one of the few cooperatives there. It hosts bike repair workshops every Friday called Fix It Fridays.
A lot of that when I think back and reminisce on things, it originated with these rides, with my mom. It later, we do bicycle repair workshops. Rich City Rides does every Friday. We call them Fix It Fridays. And my first experience with my first bike was there was no place for it to get repaired. So as it began to break down, we just got rid of it. And I didn't get another bike until I purchased my own later on in life.
Najari moved to Richmond, California during the recession and housing crisis of 2009. 2 years later, he was on the BPAC, the City of Richmond's Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee.
They had just finalized their bicycle master plan and a pedestrian master plan. These plans they're taken from community feedback and like a look into the future of how the streets would be improvements that be made on the street. I had gotten into the BPAC and interested in it based on just social rides that I had been a part of, and one of the missing elements to the BPAC is like they're focused on the built infrastructure, but what about the human part? We build these bike lanes. Who are we building them for, right? So that was one of the inspirations for starting Rich City Rides. It's because if we're building these bike lanes, I need to make sure that the community is involved.
From there, he started the Richmond Rides Photo Project, which captured photo portraits of riders who used the Greenway, a 3-mile pedestrian and bike path surrounded by community art and urban agriculture.
It was a project where we would take in photographs of people who rode the Greenway. So it would be the dad and his kids. It would be the family who was riding by. It would be the recycler, who was just using the bike to collect cans or whatever. It would be it was just like a rainbow of all the types of people that ride bikes. Not just the folks that dress up in lycra, but just the everyday commuters as well. This got picked up by the Richmond Arts Center, who provided the resources to display this project in their exhibit.
Then, he started hosting the free bicycle repair workshops and more.
This is before Unity Park was built, before the bike shop was there. The first things that we did was I reached out to some neighborhood mechanics who would come out once a month, and we'd take a donated bike, refurbish it, and at the end of the day, we gave the bike to somebody who needed it. Our very first project was in response to a council member who said that people in Richmond don't ride bikes, and especially Black folks in Richmond don't ride bikes, and that was the start of us doing these Friday night rides, paired off with the bicycle repair workshops. It was later on that we got the name Rich City Rides. I was actually in this team meeting with our longtime collaborator, Urban Tilth, and one of Urban Tilth's youth. They're not a youth anymore. This was like 9 years ago, But she said, you should call it Rich City, right? I was showing her the logo, like I was putting the logo together right there on the spot. And she said, call it Rich City. So I did. And I immediately edited the logo and put that in there. And that's what it's been called ever since. Shout out to Tere Jimenez, who was the young woman who came up with the name originally.
He attributes the shop idea to the young people in the community.
There's youth that have been through our programs. The bike shop actually wouldn't even been there if it wasn't for a youth that advocated for it. He started our first youth bike club, and I was just in through Rich City Rides, we just supported what he wanted to do. Like they came up with the logo. I have a background in graphic design, so digitized the logo for him. And this is like before the bike shop was there, and he came to me. He was like, you know, Jari, we need a home base, and he had always wanted to work in a bike shop anyway. Let's get this shop built.
The bike shop is just one part of a larger ecosystem of community wealth and the idea of co-creating neighborhoods that are by us and for us.
People are the biggest resource. We can't. Rich City Rides wouldn't be what it is right now without people, and it's not going to be what it becomes without the people here. It's based on that we've started the Rich City Project, which continues to pay homage to the name Rich City. And that project is based on one, securing property for community. So purchasing these properties, developing them, residential as well as commercial, for the community good. So the bike shop has to be there for the next 10 generations, right? Long after I'm gone, we want to make sure that this thing always remains in the community. And we're looking at a childcare cooperative that we want to build. There's the Black Wellness Hub at Unity Park that we're looking to build. But we want to take our community engagement to a level of, great, we've built the park, we've built the bike shop, let's build the village. And for us, a rich city, the definition of that is a city where everybody has what they need, food, clothing, and shelter, a reason to get up in the morning, friends and family, interconnection.
Most profoundly, no matter your feelings on the word spirituality, Najari has a deep trust in his intuition, a groundedness in his own ability to make a difference, a deep practice of trust in himself that allows him to be a powerful conduit for community change. We can all cultivate our own trust and belief that we are enough, we're worthy, we're powerful, and we're able. Marion G., one of the 3 co-executive directors of CJA, keenly feels the urgency of just transition as she processes the grief of losing her mother earlier this year. She's been with CJA since 2015.
I think something I should talk to other folks about too is I just feel impatient too. Like impatient with the little things, whereas I don't know, it's like time is different now. Like I got to say goodbye to my mom, and one of the last things that she said was to live life to the fullest. And so coming back, like trying to like live into that is really hard because you see people talking about something that just seems so insignificant. Just like compare like in the big scheme of everything.
Marion was born in Arizona and grew up in Southern California with multiple cultures in her heritage.
I think growing up in Irvine and in Hacienda Heights, I was really lucky that my parents decided to stay there or come back to Southern California because I had all my grandparents. So my mom Kay's parents were from New Jersey, and they were only children of farmers there, and had come to California in the 50s, and that's where my mom was born. And it was just really unique experience going out to spend time with them on their farm. And especially being around my grandmother, she was very just like stubborn and independent, and like I feel like sounds like from a long line of stubborn and independent women. And then my father's, Kelvin's parents, had immigrated from China, from southern China, from some small villages near Toisan, though that side of the family had been in the US for a long time, since the 1800s. they kind of like went back and forth. I think one of my great grandfathers had an MSG factory in Brooklyn, and my grandfather was going back and forth. So I just kind of grew up between two really different families, and I think that was part of the special sauce that made me who I am.
Her father was a professor of pharmacology, and her mother was a teacher. She gravitated towards the sciences and married her love of history with a master's in environmental history and policy. But academia didn't answer her questions about her relationship to our environment and our relationships to each other.
So yeah, I did AmeriCorps, and I lived abroad in Chile for a little while, volunteered with a nonprofit there, and met some amazing folks when I was doing AmeriCorps, like Dolly, who he and I were the people of color at our organization, at our environmental organization, and that was like when I thought, okay, there's something not right here if we're the only two here and I'm only half Chinese. You know, there's more here to that story. And so I think ever since then, doing AmeriCorps, it's been to find that story. And I think that's part of the reason I was so attracted to Climate Justice Alliance, because I was new to it. Was very over time learning about the environmental justice and climate justice movement. And what attracted me to CJA was how clearly they centered that history and the leadership of grassroots and frontline folks who I didn't read about in my history classes.
After AmeriCorps, Marion continued at environmental organizations and working at a foundation before she found out about CJA, after becoming a board member at one of CJA's member orgs, Thousand Currents. She started to do some grant writing and coordinate energy democracy calls for CJA.
This was the story that felt missing. It's like looking at a painting or something. I was like putting all the piece or a puzzle, like putting all the pieces together. And I'm like, this is not all adding up, right? And then I met the folks that were like really like holding the solutions that we needed to see. Yeah. And then I just was like, tell me what else you need me to do.
The co-executive director model is one example of practicing just transition. Building the new is going to require some experimentation and a little stepping outside the box. Because even though we know what we're moving towards, we still got our work cut out for us.
There's just new models that we all want to explore, and so this is one way of us exploring that and seeing how we can share responsibility, how we can support different pathways to leadership, how we can challenge other organizations to not just rely on one single person to be the face of an organization. And I even think Benicia and Monica and I'll just speak for myself, like I don't think we want to or I don't want us to be seen as the face either.
I hope we've been able to emphasize throughout this episode that leadership comes from within, and it's in all of us, especially as we support and be in relationship with each other.
And I think that also the challenging thing that I think you and I have talked about before also is just it was becoming increasingly difficult for various reasons in our society for us to connect person to person anyway. And then you add a pandemic on top of that, it makes it even more challenging. Because I think at the end of the day, when those tough moments happen, that if you have strong, trusting relationships, then it's much easier to get through them. So I think that has always been what I found is like, if something comes up, a tough moment, whether it's a climate disaster has come through, maybe we're in disagreement, that happens in our alliance of 72 plus members, right? You don't always agree on everything, or maybe it's a conflict with an ally or someone else. I think remembering how important relationships are to dealing with the climate crisis. It's not about techno fixes and schemes, just pumping it out of the air. At the end of the day, what we need to be changing is our relationships with each other, with ourselves, and with Mother Earth. And so when those tougher moments happen, I have to remind myself to connect with those people so we can just be really honest and clear about what's happening and how do we get through this together.
With that perspective, it's urgent for us to focus on collectively moving toward just transition.
The way we have related to each other is the way we related to the earth and vice versa. And it's one of, what can I get out of this person to advance my own goals of whatever it may be. It's very rarely about getting to know the person for who they are and them just like their wholeness, right? And just supporting each other. And I think a way that, like, humans have existed for a long time. We're social creatures. We're able to thrive because we're here to support each other. We're interdependent. We're not just dependent or just independent, where our success lies in each other and the collective success lies in the individual too, right? I'm able to contribute to my community because community has contributed to me and have, you know, supported me. And, like, this is a story of a lot of other folks, through challenging times, through difficult times as a young person in this moment. And so for us, like, we just get to know people, and our focus is not on outcome, right? Even though, like, relationships we've built have led to really important, quote unquote, like, tangible outcomes and stuff, we're able to support and, like, exist in a very radical way, in a very resistant way, what we're taught of, like, where people are there only to serve a purpose of advancing my own whatever career goal or profit motive or whatever. But our intentionality is like, we're investing in people. We're going deep because people are worth it and our survival depends on it.
That future is, currency being able to circulate through the community much more before it exits the community. That looks like those who have been barred away from resources, who have not had the connections that they need to do the things that they aspire to. It's really dismantling systemic oppression. That's what it looks like. It looks like everybody having what they need and nobody needing to take too much. It looks like, I can get everything that I need and it has like a very specific flavor to it. In Richmond, California, that may look, taste, and feel different. In Brooklyn, New York, that may taste and feel different in Indianapolis. And when I travel to these places, I'm able to see things are similar, but it's got that special flair to it I can't get anywhere else. For me, when I think of things like, I've been told that pineapples taste differently in Hawaii. You have to go to Hawaii to get those. I don't need a tomato from 1,000 miles away if we can grow these, locally. It's everybody knowing who their neighbors are. Is a child is out there. You see a child in the park, and everybody knows the child. Everybody knows the parents, and everybody knows that child is going to be protected. It's caring for our seniors and our elders, because we have the bandwidth and the time to do so, as well as the resources. It's beautiful families in whatever way a family looks like to you. Being able to thrive and just on that level. Same way your body has to, like, your right leg has to has to work with your left leg to get you where you're going. To me, the village is no different. There's that African proverb that by yourself you can go fast, but together we go far. And we've got so much further to go. So we got to go there together.
Thanks for tuning in to Stories from Home this season. We hope you've enjoyed the ride with us this year, and we hope you continue to live the just transition in the ways that you are within your homes and communities. Our survival depends on it. Stories from Home is a production of the Climate Justice Alliance featuring me, your host, Keenan Rhodes, story editors Jessica Zhao and Olivia Burlingame, and sound editing by Elijah Pogues. To learn more about the Climate Justice Alliance, visit climatejusticealliance.org.